I wrote this poem so we could sing it to You Picked a Fine Time to Leave Me, Lucille. Wrote that for a Christmas party Oakleaf had a few years ago, and I just thought I'd read it to get it on YouTube. And each verse is about a problem one of our guys had. So here's how it goes. You picked a fine time to break down old A, with my tools and parts far away. Been through the bad coil, the sludge and the old oil, but now you've ruined my day. You picked a bad time to break down old A. Now this one is about Herb. He had a leaking engine, and I was following him, and I got oil all over my car. You picked a fine time to leak your rear main. I followed behind you as you took your best aim. I washed and I washed her, I scrubbed her down hard, but my windshield will never be quite the same. You picked a fine time to leak your rear main. Now this one's about Chuck, who we were at a senior home. He's riding the ladies around in his roadster, and he chipped a tooth on his transmission. You picked a fine time to cause our worst fear, riding the girls and calling them dear. As you drove at high speed, your hands they did freeze, and you chipped off a tooth on your gear. You picked a fine time to cause our worst fear. This one's about Ted. We were down in the Amish country in Ohio. Every time he would put on his brakes, the engine would die. And then it would restart and off we'd go. And this went on till evening, and we're riding around the area, and we finally found the problem. You picked a fine time to die and spark out. It took until dark, but we figured it out. You lit up the roadway and scared the kids away. The brake pedal shorted things out. You picked a fine time to die and spark out. This one's about Reed. He had 4 flat tires on one of our Amish trips down there. You picked a fine time to have 4 flat tires, all running well till you stopped all the cars. 1 is okay, 2 is a charm, but 4 is a pain in the arse. You picked a fine time to have 4 flat tires. This is about Mike. He ran out of gas. He's done that a couple of times. You picked a fine time to need gasoline. You've passed all the stations and space in between. You sit there like an old mule, make me look like a damn fool, and now you're the star of the scene. You picked a fine time to need gasoline. This is Bill. We were on an island in the Detroit River, Grosse Ile, and he broke an axle. You picked a fine time to break that axle. Out on an island, all running quite well. Bill jumped out to say, all looks quite okay, till the wheel from the axle it fell. You picked a fine time to break that axle. This is Bob. We were all the way down in Williamsburg. It's a long way from Michigan. And he had a leak in his radiator, and we tried to fix it. Then we all went on tour, and he kept playing with it and ended up having to change it in the parking lot on a very hot day. You picked a fine time to spring that small leak, big enough to cause overheat. We tried the quick fix, the epoxy we did mix, but you fixed it alone in the heat. You picked a fine time to spring that small leak. This is Bill again. And it was another Amish run. And he had a manifold gasket leak. You picked a fine time to sound that tick-tick, loud and annoying, made the engine sound sick. Gene found a new gasket. On camera you fixed it, and the tour did not miss a lick. You picked a fine time to sound that tick-tick. This one's about Ray. Ended up, he thought he had a clutch problem, and he didn't. You picked a fine time to fail that new clutch. RC didn't think the job was too tough. Out comes the rear spring, in goes the new thing. Turns out it was not the clutch. You picked a fine time to fail that new clutch. This is Jim. We looked at his car one day and we found the engine sagging. There once was an engine called Jim, who had no engine mounts with him. When the brake was applied, the engine would rise. 'Twas the cross shaft that held up old Jim. There once was an engine called Jim. Now this is a different Bill who had a gasoline problem. You picked a fine time to run that tank dry. 23 cars unable to drive. This all happened before, into my gas line we tore. A third time we'll tell you goodbye. You picked a fine time to run that tank dry. And this is the same Bill, same problem, verse written by a friend of mine. You picked a fine time to run out of gas. 23 A's unable to pass. We've had some breakdowns, misfires, and go-rounds, but this time we sat on our ass. You picked a fine time to run out of gas. So that's a kind of a poem that we sang to You Picked a Fine Time to Leave Me, Lucille, and it was fun at the time. I just wanted to get it down on video.